What if I told you that one of the most famous legends in history, the stories whispered in childhood and retold in movies, masks a terrifying truth that forces us to confront the limits of human perception and the fragility of our collective memory? Imagine a tale passed through centuries, a story that seems simple at first glance. Yet beneath its surface hides a pattern of social adaptation, psychological coping, and neurological responses that reveal how civilizations respond to existential stress. The legend of the Pied Piper of Hamelin is often treated as a quaint medieval fairy tale, a cautionary story for children about promises and consequences. But if we strip away the folklore, we uncover a historical phenomenon that is far more unsettling, a reflection of how societies react to trauma, resource scarcity, and the invisible signals that shape collective behavior. The year was 1284. The town of Hamelin, located in what is now Lower Saxony, Germany, was suffering a crisis that was not uncommon in medieval Europe. A rat infestation that threatened food supplies, spread disease, and instilled deep anxiety in the population. The chroniclers of the time describe a mysterious figure, a piper dressed in multicolored clothing, who promised to solve the town's problem in exchange for a reward. On the surface, this is a simple transactional tale. A problem arises, a specialist offers a solution, and the community negotiates terms. But the deeper layers of the story suggest a far more profound dynamic. When we analyze this narrative through the lens of modern psychology and neuroscience, we begin to see that the town's collective decision-making was shaped not just by rational thought, but by stress-induced cognitive biases and social conformity pressures. Neuroscientifically, humans have evolved to respond to acute threats with heightened attention, rapid information processing, and a strong drive to follow perceived leadership signals. The rats in Hamelin were not merely pests. They were a tangible representation of systemic failure, an externalized symbol of the town's internal anxieties about scarcity and disease. The arrival of the piper acted as a signal that the town's neural networks were primed to recognize a charismatic figure promising control over chaos. Collective attention became focused, perception narrowed, and the social system, much like a neural network under high stress, prioritized immediate solutions over critical evaluation of risk. Historical records suggest that the town agreed to pay the piper, a decision that at first seems like compliance or gullibility. Yet when we consider the cognitive and social pressures at play, this choice emerges as an adaptive mechanism. In moments of existential threat, groups often exhibit what psychologists call herd behavior, where the system's energy flow concentrates on a single node here, the piper as a way to stabilize chaotic dynamics. This is the first layer of the story, the part that aligns with classical interpretations, a promise, a solution, a reward. But the twist, the element that transforms this tale from a quaint legend into a window on human and societal cognition, lies in what happens next. According to chroniclers, when the piper was denied the promised payment, he led the children of the town away. While folklore depicts this as a magical retribution, contemporary research into mass psychogenic events and collective stress responses offers a chillingly rational explanation. The disappearance of the children can be interpreted as a metaphor for the town's inability to cope with the consequences of disrupted social contracts. When the energy flow within a system, be it neural or societal, is blocked, when expected rewards or reinforcements fail to materialize, the system reacts in ways that can seem irrational but are in fact adaptive responses to imbalance. Neurologically, humans are wired to detect violations of fairness and predictability. Dopamine pathways in the brain, which mediate reward anticipation, activate strongly when promises are fulfilled and show significant disruption when expectations are violated. In a high-stress social network, such disruptions ripple outward, influencing collective decision-making and risk perception. Viewed through this lens, the piper becomes more than a character. He is a signal amplifier, exposing the latent vulnerabilities of a complex social system under duress. The story then shifts from a morality tale to an illustration of how human societies manage stress and uncertainty. Imagine the town as a neural system, each citizen a node in a distributed network. The rat infestation functions as a high-amplitude stress signal, triggering the network to seek stabilization. The piper acts as a focused input that temporarily aligns the network. But when the promised reinforcement is removed, the system overshoots, manifesting the catastrophic event recorded in legend. The deeper implication here is that what seems like tragedy or malevolence is often a symptom of system-level adaptation. The brain and society share analogous architectures. Both rely on distributed processing, feedback loops, and adaptive responses to unexpected stimuli. Just as neurons may fire in patterns that produce hallucinations under extreme stress, social networks may behave in ways that produce historical anomalies, disappearances, migrations, sudden collapses that appear inexplicable to observers but follow the underlying logic of system dynamics. Philosophically, this invites us to reconsider our assumptions about causality, morality, and historical narrative. When we hear that the piper led the children away, we instinctively assign blame, label actions as right or wrong, and seek a linear explanation. Yet in the framework of complex systems and adaptive networks, the event is less about individual agency and more about emergent behavior in response to environmental and social pressures. The terror embedded in the legend is not supernatural. It is epistemic. It forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge and the fragility of our predictive models when applied to human behavior. How often do societies unknowingly amplify risk through collective expectation, social signaling, and unexamined trust? The Hamelin story, when stripped of its magical veneer, becomes a case study in the hidden mechanisms of historical causality. In practical terms, the narrative illuminates the dynamics of compliance, trust, and punishment in human communities. Anthropologists studying similar events across cultures note that ritualized responses, symbolic enactments, and cautionary tales often function as distributed memory storage, encoding the consequences of breaking social contracts in ways that individual memory alone cannot sustain. The legend of the Pied Piper thus serves as both a mnemonic device and a behavioral calibrator. It teaches subsequent generations about the consequences of collective neglect, the dangers of ignoring emergent threats, and the psychological weight of promises. From a neurobiological standpoint, stories like this engage mirror neurons, empathy circuits, and prefrontal cortex planning regions in ways that abstract data or statistical reports cannot. They simulate risk, failure, and reward scenarios vicariously, allowing societies to learn adaptively without direct exposure to catastrophe. Have you ever heard the story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin? It's one of those fairy tales that's way darker than you remember. A mysterious piper comes to a rat-infested town, promises to get rid of the pests for a fee, and then magically leads them away with his pipe music. But when the townspeople refuse to pay up, he returns, plays his pipe again. And this time, he leads away all 130 of their children, who vanish into a mountain, never to be seen again. Chilling, right? But what if I told you this wasn't just a spooky bedtime story? What if there's a kernel of truth, a real historical tragedy hidden within this legend? Today, we're going to peel back the layers of the Pied Piper mystery, looking at it through the eyes of historians, psychologists, and even neuroscientists to uncover what might have really happened to the children of Hamelin. Let's start with the history, because the town of Hamelin, Germany, takes this story very seriously. There's an inscription on a house in the town dated 1602 that refers to the event. It says, "In the year 1284, on the day of Saints John and Paul, the 26th of June 130, children born in Hamelin were led away by a piper dressed in many colors to their Calvary near the Koppen and were lost." Notice something? There are no rats mentioned in this early account. The rats seem to have been a later addition, added to the story around the 16th century to make it more dramatic and symbolic. So, if the original story was about missing children, what could have happened? Historians have a few compelling theories. One of the most popular is the idea of emigration. The 13th century was a time of hardship, famine, and overpopulation in Germany. It's possible that a piper, who was actually a charismatic recruitment agent, lured the young people of Hamelin away with promises of a better life in new lands, perhaps in Eastern Europe, like Poland or Transylvania. The colorful clothes could have been the uniform of these recruiters, and the piping simply a metaphor for their persuasive promises. This mass migration of the town's youth would have felt like a tragic loss to the parents left behind, a loss that over time morphed into a supernatural tale of abduction. Another theory points to a more grim possibility, a natural disaster. The area around Hamelin is hilly and prone to landslides. Could the children have been playing near a hillside when a sudden collapse buried them? The story of them disappearing into a mountain would then be a literal description of the event. Or perhaps it was a disease outbreak. Plagues like the Black Death were common, but other epidemics could have specifically targeted children, leading to a massive, sudden die-off. In a pre-scientific age, such a devastating event could easily have been blamed on a supernatural figure, a piper who brought death instead of salvation. There's also a darker, more psychological theory involving a children's crusade. We know of historical children's crusades where charismatic leaders inspired thousands of children to march towards the Holy Land with disastrous results. Could the Pied Piper have been a similar figure, a cult-like leader who led the town's youth on a doomed pilgrimage? This would explain their willingness to follow him and their ultimate disappearance. It's a haunting thought that the children weren't taken against their will, but chose to leave, captivated by a powerful and dangerous idea. Now let's switch gears and look at this from a completely different angle. Neuroscience. What about the pipe? Is it possible for music to have such a powerful, hypnotic effect on people, especially children? While we can't literally control minds with a flute, we do know that music has a profound impact on the human brain. Music can synchronize our brainwaves, trigger strong emotions, and even influence our movements. Think about how a marching band's rhythm makes you want to tap your feet, or how a powerful anthem can bring a crowd together. Neuroscientists talk about something called auditory driving or brainwave entrainment. This is the phenomenon where our brain's electrical cycles tend to align with the rhythm of external stimuli, like a drumbeat or a musical melody. For children whose brains are still developing and are highly susceptible to suggestion, a repetitive rhythmic tune could be incredibly captivating. It could induce a trance-like state, making them more suggestible and more likely to follow the source of the sound without question. Imagine a group of children, perhaps already suffering from malnutrition which can affect cognitive function, hearing this strange, compelling music. The rhythm could literally sync their movements, making them walk in step, following the piper as one unified group. It wouldn't be magic in the supernatural sense, but magic in the neurological sense. The piper wouldn't need to be a sorcerer, just a skilled musician who understood, perhaps intuitively, how to harness the power of rhythm and melody to influence a crowd. This brings us to the psychological component. Why would a community create such a specific and terrifying story to explain a tragedy? Legends and fairy tales often serve as cultural coping mechanisms. They are a way for societies to process trauma, to make sense of the senseless. Losing 130 children, no matter the cause, would be an unimaginable trauma for a small medieval town. Creating the figure of the Pied Piper allows the community to place the blame on an external evil force. It is easier to accept that a magical villain stole your children than to confront the harsh realities of famine, disease, or the possibility that your children willingly left for a dangerous crusade. The piper becomes a scapegoat, a container for all the town's grief, anger, and guilt. The story also serves as a powerful cautionary tale for future generations. Always honor your promises, beware of strangers, and keep your children close. It's a way of embedding a community's deepest fears and values into a memorable narrative that gets passed down through the centuries. So when we put all these pieces together, the historical context of medieval life, the psychological need for narrative, and the neuroscientific power of music, the legend of the Pied Piper transforms. It's no longer just a fairy tale. It becomes a fascinating puzzle, a reflection of a real-world tragedy seen through the lens of folklore. The most likely scenario is probably a combination of these theories. Perhaps a recruitment agent, the piper, did come to the overpopulated town of Hamelin. Using music and charisma, he persuaded the town's youth to join a mass migration to settle new lands in the east. To the parents who never saw their children again, this departure was a catastrophic loss. Over the years, as the story was told and retold, the historical details faded. The recruitment agent became a magical piper, the migration became an abduction, and the rats were added to create a clearer moral about keeping one's promises. The story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin is a powerful reminder that behind our most enduring myths, there often lies a sliver of human truth. It's a testament to how we use stories to grapple with the inexplicable, to warn future generations, and to remember the tragedies that shaped us. The children of Hamelin may have been lost to history, but through this dark and captivating legend, their story, in a way, lives on forever. What do you think really happened? Was it migration, disaster, or something else entirely? Let me know your theories down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden history of fairy tales, make sure to like and subscribe for more. See you next time.